Hello and welcome to Royal Holloway's Study Skills for University video. In this video we'll go through some of the key skills related to studying that you'll need for university and the differences between school and college and university study and how you can get your skills up to scratch before you get to university. You'll need a pen and paper for the activities, and feel free to pause this video at any point to give yourself more time to complete the activities. If you have any technical issues or comments or feedback, there is a link in the description and also more detail at the end of the video on how to give us feedback. Please do, it's very helpful. So let's get started. Okay, so to get us started, we're going to have a look at the key differences between university and school or college. If you're in a group or you're with someone, feel free to discuss and just pause the video or just think on your own what are the key differences between university and school or college. There are some pictures on the video here to help you, and like I said, feel free to pause now to give yourself a few minutes to think. So let's go through the differences between university and school or college. So first of all, we've got some timetables, and what they represent is actually the way you spend your time is very different at university compared to school or college. While at the moment you might be expected to be in every day for most of the day with fewer free periods, at university your timetable can be have fewer contact hours on it, so you might be expected to be in formal teaching less. However, what you'll learn at university is that time isn't necessarily free, and you do need to be doing assignments or research or studying, revising in that time. So a big part of going to university is learning to manage that time, and we'll talk about some time management strategies later on in the presentation. Related to this, a lot of your time at university is independent, so you'll be expected to be studying on your own, and you probably get it every time you move on to the next stage in your education, but you really don't get spoon-fed by teachers or academics at university. You are responsible for your own grades, your own time, and it isn't that you are chased for work that you haven't submitted, or if you don't attend lectures and seminars, that's on you and your responsibility. And more generally, a lot of your work will be independent in the sense that if you're writing a dissertation, you'll come up with the topic on your own, you won't be given a question, and you're expected to research that independently. And actually related to this, I've got some books there to represent the fact that universities have a lot of resources in terms of the libraries, but also online that you can use, and navigating those can be another big step. Using the library, for example, can be quite intimidating. Finding resources can be quite difficult at the beginning, so being able to use the library effectively is another skill that you might need when you get to university. This picture is of a lecture at Royal Holloway, and what this represents is that universities are a lot bigger. You may have less one-on-one time with lecturers or teachers than you're used to. So this is a lecture to represent that. There may be a lot of people, not just on your course, but in the university more generally. Royal Holloway is on the smaller side in terms of universities, but we still have about 10,000 students, so there are a lot of you at university. And again, this links back to the independence. So how can you work effectively in kind of large groups and things like lectures where there's less interactivity. And we're going to talk about note-taking and how to effectively gain as much as you can from things like larger lectures. We also have an image here of someone using a piece of technology, and that's another more practical thing. If you're doing a course that is more practical or technical or vocational, you'll have the opportunity to use equipment and materials and facilities that you might not otherwise have at university. So that's something that you can adjust, but obviously can be a really big benefit of going to university. And then finally, you can see a bed that's just zoomed in, and that's to symbolise the fact that a lot of people will move away for university, and so while they're also responsible for studying independently, they'll also be living independently, and again that links back into time management. You will also be struggling to kind of balance your work with a brand new social life and having to shop and cook and do your own washing. So that's another big thing that's a difference between university and school or college. Another big difference that I wanted to go into slightly more detail on is how your mark is assessed and graded. So you might already be given a mark out of 100 or a percentage for work, and that's the same at university, but actually different percentage marks are classified, and as you can see on the table on the right, they are given certain names or scores based on your mark out of 100. So a mark of 100%, you might get them a few times at school or college. That's very rare at university. No work is considered perfect. So actually the best possible grade, so first class classification, is anything over 70%. So that's kind of the top mark you can get. And as you can see, moving down the table, there are various other grades you can get. So an upper second class honours is a 2-1, so that's anything between 60 to 69%. A 2-2 is between 50 and 59%, and that's also known as a lower second class honours. And then a third class honours is between 40 and 49%, and then anything below 40% is a fail mark. So it's something slightly different that you have to get used to when you go to university. Another thing to be aware of is that your assessments can be formative or summative, and they basically just mean practice or count towards your final grade. So in a module, you may have several formative assessments, so maybe a written assignment that you get feedback on, and then you can prepare for the actual final summative assessment. So it's quite like school or college, where you get practice assignments, where you get feedback, mock exams essentially, and that's what they're called at university. Another big difference that you might not be used to at university is that the types of assessment can be really different to school or college depending on the subject that you're studying. So whilst you might have exams and essays, you also have things like presentations, where you have to go away and do some research on a topic and come back and present it to your peers and lecturers. Essays and dissertations won't be too alien. Dissertation obviously can be a lot longer than some of the essays you might be used to at school or college, and they are a lot more independent, as I mentioned earlier, where you'll go away and do that research on your own and submit the final project a few months later. Exams, hopefully you'll be familiar with. So you might have an unseen exam in controlled conditions, which is like a normal exam as you do in A-level or GCSE. But you may have a seen exam paper where you know what's going to be in the exam, so you know which content to revise, but still it's in controlled conditions, so in a big hall. You may have an open book or takeaway exam, so these will last like 24 hours, 48 hours, where you can go home and do the research. You might have to do a bit of kind of practical work. So for example, if you have a maths takeaway exam, you might have to show all your workings, but you're not in an exam hall, you're taking that taking that exam home. If you're doing an arts or creative course, you may be assessed on your portfolio, so that's what you submit as part of your modules. Similarly, you might have to create a product or a piece of work, particularly with things like media arts or drama and theatre studies, creating a production, and you're assessed on the actual production itself. And similarly, a performance, so if you do music or drama, doing a performance, maybe how you're assessed. If you're doing a language, again, this might be more familiar if you already study languages, but doing an oral examination where you have to speak is a common method of assessment. And some universities and some courses may actually assess you based on your participation in lectures or seminars, so how much you talk, how much research you've done, what is the quality of your responses in those scenarios. And group work is another big part of assessment at university. So for example, things like computer science, you might be given a project to put together as a group, and some courses it's really important that you're able to work with others to produce pieces of work, so that is another way that you're assessed at university. One thing I really want to stress when you're thinking about the study skills needed at university is that it's not something you're expected to know straight away. There is a lot of support, which I'll go into, with finding your feet at university and getting used to the way you study. And I think it's important to remember that when you get to university, that you're not expected to know everything straight away, and you are able to ask for help, and there are lots of places that you can ask for help with these study skills. So like I just said, you're not expected to be perfect at the start. Most universities will catch you up. So they may give you a talk from the library, or you might have a tour of your academic library, and they'll give you tips on how to use the library, how to access online resources. At Royal Holloway, we have a service called CDAS, which will do academic study skills sessions, so things like referencing writing. If you feel that your maths skills might need improving for your degree course, they'll do maths catch-ups. If you feel that you need pre-sessional English, they'll provide that, so that will help your English written and speaking skills before you get to university. And you will also get tips on how to use things like Moodle, which is a virtual learning environment. So you may do tests or get lecture recordings or submit coursework on online platform like Moodle. And also there'll be other kind of equipment and resources that you can access online, and IT will help you access those. You may also get sessions on plagiarism, referencing, how to submit things to a referencing or plagiarism checker. Okay, so I've spoken a lot about time management and how to make sure when you have a free period at university, how to make sure you're using your time effectively. And we've got some tips that may be helpful. So first of all, I find the concept of budgeting your time quite an easy way to make sure you're making the most of your time, but also balancing between studying and social life and your extracurricular activities and maybe part-time jobs or work experience. So think of your time as a kind of currency, so allocating a certain number of hours a week to a particular activity and making sure you stick to that. So you may want to have a written or online calendar where you're able to literally allocate certain times to certain activities. So for example, if you have a free period on a Wednesday afternoon, that you save that for hockey team practice or doing your English seminar preparations. So actually physically marking out time and budgeting it can be really helpful. Being able to prioritise, so at certain times of the year, certain activities are going to be more important than others. So for example, in the exam period, you'll want to prioritise revision over your social life. While you can still socialise, one thing is more important than the other. So perhaps having a to-do list with the most important things at the top, so you get them done first, and then kind of working your way through the less important things. Don't be afraid to say no. So this kind of links into what I was just saying about prioritising, but making sure that the most important things get done, and don't be afraid to ask to do something a different time if it doesn't work for you, and if you get asked to socialise, making sure you feel confident saying no, sorry, I've got to focus on my assignment. That's absolutely okay, and is a really good skill in relation to time management. Finding your productive time. So I personally find that I am a morning person. I can get up early and work quite effectively, and then the later the day gets, especially things like evening working, I find much more difficult. So experiment with working at different times, figuring out when suits you, and find your productive time can be really helpful. And don't get sidetracked. So something that a lot of people do is they'll sit down in their allocated time for revision, for example, and then have a Twitter feed open, or going on the news, or texting someone, going on WhatsApp, Instagram. So it's really important that you're able to dedicate time to a particular thing and sticking to that. There are some tools that are out there that can help you with that, so I'd recommend looking at things like a Pomodoro timer, which allows you to do kind of short bursts of work and then have really short breaks in between, and you can be really strict then and postpone, if you get a text, until your break. There's also things like browser extensions where you can block certain social media websites, or only allow you to go on the pages you need to get your assignment or your work done, so that can be really helpful. And also just making sure you're in a space that allows you to concentrate and not get sidetracked. So if group revision isn't working for you, maybe moving and working on your own, because it's important that you don't get distracted by other people or other things. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about note making. So I talked about how quite often degree subjects will have large lead lectures where you'll be with lots of other students, and it's a less discussion based interactive environment, and you are more expected to sit and listen. There may be opportunities for questions, but it's not possible that every person in that lecture is going to be able to ask all the questions that they need. So note making is a really important tool, so you need to make sure that you're getting everything that you need out of that lecture. So one thing that you may be aware of or may not is that you're responsible for making your own notes. Some universities, some lecturers, some modules won't provide any lecture notes or slides, so you need to make sure you've got all of the notes that you need to get everything that you can out of that lecture. Another important thing is that some people find that taking notes can actually help you stay focused and concentrate on what's being said. Having an effective note-taking method can make sure you stay on topic and you're understanding what's being said in the context of your subject. And it goes without saying that they're very helpful when it comes to exam time. They will have a recap and a summary of all of the content that you need for those exams. So note-taking is very important. And as I mentioned, lecturers may share slides or recordings or notes, but if something goes wrong with that recording software, you need to make sure you have a backup with notes, or if lecturers decide not to share that, it's better to not rely on slides or recordings. The key thing with note making is that you don't copy down slides or write down everything the lecturer is saying, but what you need to do is write down information that's new to you or information that you need to remember. There's no point kind of making loads of titles or writing lots of unnecessary content down that you already know, because it makes your note-taking more difficult because you've got to write more, but also it means that not everything there is super relevant and you won't need it in the future. So all you need to be doing is writing down new information or information that you need to remember. So how can you practically improve your note-taking? So first of all, I would consider how you're actually taking notes. Consider using a pen and paper and taking handwritten notes rather than using a tablet or laptop. This may not necessarily work for everyone, but some studies have shown that taking notes on a computer may be less effective, even if you aren't distracted by things like social media or email or news or the internet. So consider trying to take notes by hand. Having said that, you might be better off typing. Obviously you can be a lot quicker, and if you can integrate it with things like the slides you've been sent, having technology can be quite helpful. What I'd recommend is just figuring things out, trying things out and seeing what works best for you. Another thing to consider is the kind of format of your notes and how they're laid out. There is a method called Cornell note-taking, where you will divide your page up, so draw a line down the page about a third of the way in, leave that blank, and what you can do is summarise the session, so what lecture you're in, maybe the subject, the module, the date at the top. And then your main notes, so the place where you'll be making all your notes during the session will be on that 2/3 section, so the right hand side. And the idea is that afterwards you'll summarise what was covered, so that enables you to really consider what the purpose of that lecture was generally and the key information. And then that left-hand side column is the recall column, where you record key questions in relation to that content, or memory cues, so things like dates or how that content relates to your exam or coursework. And what you should be able to do afterwards is cover up that right-hand side notes column and actually recite all of the notes using only the left-hand side column. And it shows the key information in a very concise way on the left-hand side. And then if you're revising, you'll have all the key information quickly on the left-hand side, and you can see at a glance what that session was about without having all of the kind of extraneous content that you don't necessarily need. So try it out, see if that works for you. Another thing that can be really helpful with note-taking are using abbreviations and shorthand. You'll quickly find in lectures that it's very difficult to write down everything that is mentioned, and especially you don't want to waste time on writing full words or words that aren't necessarily important in the context. So using abbreviations and shorthand can be really helpful. So what I've got on the board here are various symbols, and I'd like you to try and fill in the blanks. So either I've supplied you with a symbol or a meaning, and can you fill in the blanks? So for example, with the first one, I've got an ampersand and a plus symbol. If you write that down in your notes, what does that mean? Okay, so the answers are coming up in a second, so pause now to have a go. And here are the answers. So check how many you got right, and consider using these more frequently in your notes, and getting used to the meaning, because they can save a lot of time. For example, using e.g. as I've just said instead of for example can be really helpful because you're saving a lot of time by writing e.g. rather than example. Okay, we also have an opportunity to have a go at note making and seeing how well you can take notes. So if you are with other people, try and pair up or work in a small group. And what I want you to do is take it in turns to talk about anything that you can talk about at length, really. So I've suggested maybe your plans for the weekend, a plot of your favourite film or TV show, but really anything you can talk about for 2 or 3 minutes, and let the other person make notes on everything you're saying, so they can repeat this information back to you at the end. If you're on your own, no worries. Try and find a YouTube video or a TED Talk or a podcast extract that is about 2 or 3 minutes long, as I said, and do the same. So try and make notes using some of those strategies I've just talked about. Once you've done that, go through your notes. Did you miss anything? Did you struggle to keep up with whoever was talking? And look at how you can cut out the kind of pointless bits that you've written down. How can you make yourself make more effective notes? So thinking about things like just recording the important information on things that were new to you, and using the symbols and initialisms that I've just talked about to try and be as concise as possible. So pause this video now to have a go. Moving on to another key skill for university, presentation skills are really important, not just at university, but they can help with things like interviews, and presenting yourself more professionally as an adult, but like I said, a lot of courses will require you to deliver a presentation to your peers or tutors or academics, and this is not just the actual standing up and talking. You'll have to do your own research and create handouts for people, slides to support what you're saying, so there's a lot of skills tied into presentations for university. Do's and don'ts. Make sure you rehearse in advance. Make sure you know what's coming up and how everything on the slide relates to what you're talking about. Making sure that you include everything in notes if you need notes, so that you don't miss key information. Another key thing to do in relation to presentation skills is dividing the presentation into sections, especially if you're working in a group. So making sure everyone in the group has an opportunity to present. Don't try and get out of presenting and letting other people do it for you. As I mentioned, it's a really helpful skill, and you will be required to do it at university. You will be required to present to your peers, so getting that practice in is crucial. A few don'ts. So don't rely too much on written materials. It's really important that you don't include full sentences on a slide and read them out, as you want to only have the bare minimum on a slide so your audience aren't just reading things, they're listening to what you're saying. Just use kind of key memory prompts or summaries on slides, and don't get too worried about presenting. I think it's something that can be really scary, but like I've already said, the more you do it, the less daunting it is, and actually can be quite easy if you know the material and how to talk to a group of people. Another key area that may be different to school or college at university is the library. The library does have books, but is not just a place to borrow books. It also provides lots of study spaces. So personally, when I was at university, I would do all of my studying in the library. So I would find a desk and set up shop there for the whole day, only leaving to go to lectures and seminars. It is a studious, quiet environment with lots of resources, so it is a really good place to consider studying. There will also be IT facilities, so they will have lots of computers, IT rooms, so if you need those facilities, your university library is a really good place to look. There are also librarians who are experts in accessing resources, how to approach essay questions in terms of finding relevant materials. They know about referencing and plagiarism, and also exam skills. So if you do have a question, you can use your library as a resource for assignments. So at Royal Holloway, our librarians have a subject specialism. So if, for example, you are a law student and you'd like to find a piece of case law or a judgment or decision, you're able to contact a specialist librarian who has an expertise in those resources and those databases, and they will be able to assist you in finding materials relevant to your assignment. Libraries also have group study rooms often, so these are places that you are able to book, and there'll be small rooms, again quiet, but you're allowed to have discussions. Perhaps if you're doing a presentation, you're able to practice in there. There will be IT facilities, and it's just a good place to meet if you are doing group work or you'd like to study as a group. And finally, libraries can be really helpful if you need to print something. You quite often have access to professional printers that will be able to print things in better quality or quicker than your standard printer at home. And also they will have things like binding facilities, staplers, hole punches, etc. So the library can be really helpful, not just for books, which they are helpful for books, but also for other things as well. So we talked about studying in the library. Your library will be able to provide things like maps of where certain resources are located, and where different study areas are located within the library. It may be, depending on the university, that different areas or different libraries are for different subjects. So for example, you might have a law library or a medical library, but quite often these are open to subjects, students from different subjects as well. And another thing to be conscious of is that different areas of the library will have different expectations from you, shall I put it. So there may be silent study areas, or there may be quiet study areas where you are able to have a conversation with the person next to you. And it's a matter of preference really, about what suits you and where you work best. Going to move on to journal articles. So I've mentioned quite a little bit about books when I'm talking about the library, but actually your university library will be able to provide access to journal articles, which will be really crucial when you come to studying at university. So it's important to understand what a journal article is and how it can help you. So journals are essentially magazines for particular areas or particular subjects. So like magazines, they have lots of little articles written by academics or experts in those areas, and they publish them on a regular basis. So whilst a book might have one person's research or opinions and in a huge amount of detail, journal articles are slightly less detailed, but again maybe publishing scientific research or opinion in a particular area. They're useful for lots of reasons. So seems obvious, but because they're published more regularly than books, they're more up to date and recent, and they cover the latest advances in a particular topic. So you're getting the most up-to-date research in that area. Journals are peer-reviewed, so once an academic has finished a piece of research and written it up as a journal article, it then has to be sent to a committee, and they will examine the research, decide if it is good enough to be published, essentially. And it actually has to be different from other previous pieces of published research to be eligible. So it means that it's a unique piece of research that has been approved by other experts in that field. And journal articles often refer to first-hand research undertaken by academics. So this is particularly relevant for STEM science subjects, but what that means is that it relates to experiments or other research that have been done firsthand by academics. So it's really relevant and reliable data or information to use in your own research. Another really useful thing in relation to journals is they have to describe how the research fits into the context of the topic. So they will link you to other similar pieces of research or previous bits of research, and they'll have a really good reference list, which is all of the other research that they used in order to put together their piece of research. So what that means is you can kind of daisy chain along these references to find other pieces of research that will be helpful for your work. So where can you find journal articles? So once you get to university, you will become a member of that university's library, and quite often this allows you to get access to journal databases like JSTOR, which is the screenshot on the bottom right, and also you get direct subscriptions to journal publishers, so like the one nature.com on the left hand side. Libraries do have physical copies of journal articles, so if you see on the top right the map of the library, that purple section on the left is all of the journals, so the physical copy of the journals. But something that will come very handy when you get to university is Google Scholar, and this is Google, but just for academic writing, so journal articles and books. So if you have to search for a particular area, you can put keywords into Google and it will come up with all of the relevant academic writing in relation to that area. Another really helpful thing about journal articles is that you are able to use the abstract to determine if that piece of research is useful for your own research, and whether you want to continue reading. So an abstract is a summary essentially of the entire article in about a paragraph. So it will tell you what was studied, the context, so what research they're building on, what have they used to inform their research, and what the main findings are. So it's not just an introduction, but actually a summary of the whole article. And like I said, you can use this information to decide if that journal is relevant to your assignment and you want to keep reading, or whether it's less relevant and you actually don't need to read the full article. Referencing and plagiarism are a really big part of university study. So it's really important that you get a grip on how to reference effectively and to make sure you're avoiding plagiarism. So what is plagiarism? It ensures that credit's given to the original source, essentially. So you need to be able to give your own ideas. You can respond to the ideas or research or writing of other people, but you've got to be able to attribute that and say, this is where I got that idea from and here's what I think about it. Okay, quiz time. I'm going to give you a piece of academic behaviour and I want you to determine if it constitutes plagiarism. Feel free to pause the video at any time to think about it or discuss with the person next to you. Okay, so first one then. Is it plagiarism to use some writing by someone else in your piece of work and adding quotation marks around it? Yes, this is still not correctly cited, so usually you'll be given a referencing system to use, such as Harvard referencing, and a source must be written in a certain way. If you are adding quotation marks, usually you need to add a page number and an author and a date, and you'll need to add that piece of writing into your reference list. So if you're just copying and pasting something, even putting quote marks around it is not enough. You need to add where you got that quote from. Next one. Is it plagiarism to reuse your own writing from another piece of coursework you've done before? Yes, this is called self-plagiarism, and it might surprise you, but the idea is that you're meant to be creating original work every single time. So if you're just copying and pasting paragraphs from an old essay, you're not putting the work in to create a piece of new work. You can potentially quote yourself, but you need to reference that in the same way you would another piece of work by someone else. Is it plagiarism to split up a project with your best friend? You have the same question, and you read separate sources, you share your notes, and write two separate essays. So you're essentially splitting the work in half. Yes, you're still trying to pass off other people's work as your own. So that's the key idea here. Even though you're writing separate essays on your own, you're not copy and pasting each other's writing, you'll still have an advantage on other people by splitting up the work, essentially. Is it plagiarism to state a fact that's common knowledge or widely accessible? So, for example, 70% of the Earth is covered in water. No. So if something's common knowledge, it's fine. If in doubt, reference it. So if you're not sure if it's common knowledge, reference it. But sometimes something might be so widely known, so for example 70% of the Earth is covered in water, that it's actually difficult to find a source because everyone is in agreement. Is it plagiarism to forget to reference the right source for a quotation? Yes, this is plagiarism. Even if you put the wrong source or forget to write the right source, it is still plagiarism, so that's why it's really important to check your work and avoid making silly mistakes. So, what happens if you do plagiarise? Universities have software that is able to detect similarities with other pieces of published work or articles on the internet. And this screenshot here kind of illustrates what it might look like. They're constantly updating the software or the technology they use. However, quite often universities will use a piece of software called Turnitin, which highlights areas that are similarities and then where the similarity is. And then whoever is marking your work can have a look through each bit to see what the similarities are and whether there is a legitimate reason. And that will come up with a overall percentage of suspected plagiarism. If you do get in trouble for plagiarism, what can happen? There's various things. So to some extent, this depends on the level of plagiarism, whether it's an accident, whether you're a repeat offender. So hopefully you all avoid all that. But if you're at university, where do you go for support for academic study skills? So first place that you can look for help with academic study skills, such as revision, presentation skills, referencing, note taking, etc., is your department. So, academic department will have people like a personal tutor or an administrative department that will be able to provide support, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail on that on the next slide. I've mentioned the library can be a really helpful resource, particularly with looking for materials for things like assignments. Many universities will have an academic support centre. At Royal Holloway, ours is called CDAS, but there will be various different names for this, but essentially they are there to support you with academic study skills. Student Services Centre, again, may have workshops and visiting speakers that will support you in relation to academic study skills. Many universities will have a disability or dyslexia service, and this can be a really great resource if you have a disability or an additional learning need such as dyslexia. They will be able to make certain adjustments or accommodations, so it's really important that you get in contact with them as soon as you're accepted at a university, and as it says at the bottom here, flag any additional learning needs on your UCAS form. So I talked about a personal tutor. What is a personal tutor? Most universities will allocate you a personal tutor. This is someone in your department, usually an academic, who is responsible for various things in relation to your studies. So they have to maintain regular contact with you in person and by email, so you'll get an introduction and usually invited in for a meeting when you first start your course. And then you're expected to attend regular meetings with your personal tutor so they can keep track of you and make sure all of your needs are being met. So they will support you with personal issues, and that might be by, like it says, signposting specialist staff who can provide guidance, or they may be able to provide support individually. But they can also be there to support you academically, and also things like careers, planning, etc. If there are indications that you're struggling with the course, they are there to follow up and support you. And they're also there to write references when you apply for work or further study following your course. So this brings us to the end of this video on study skills for university. This video has been provided by Royal Holloway, University of London. We have lots of information on Royal Holloway on our website, and I've added a link in the description box of this video to find out more. If you are a school or a teacher, you can find out more about our resources for schools if you contact schools@royalholloway.ac.uk. And finally, if you have any feedback on this session, it would be really helpful if you can go to our form. So you can do that 3 ways. You can scan the QR code, you can click on the hyperlink where it says click here, or you can type the URL or copy that URL into your own device, and it will bring you to our feedback form, which can give us information on how you found this session. And also, if you have any questions, there's an opportunity for you to add your own questions and email address at the end to get in contact with us to ask any questions. So please do that, and thanks for listening today.